Chapter 1. Chains and numbers. They took my name first. It wasn't stolen, no. Names are not things so fragile as to be taken. Mine was erased, smothered beneath ink and code, burned away by an oath I never gave and a law I never broke. The man who did it wore the sigil of the administratum around his neck like a saint's relic, though the light from the lumen strips above made the symbol look like rusted iron rather than gold. His voice was dry parchment when he spoke. Designation, Unit 72C. He didn't look at me when he said it. None of them ever do. The clerks of the Imperium live their entire lives surrounded by the dead. Names, faces, histories. They all pass through their hands like sand. I suppose mine did too. I watched as he pressed the brand against the reclaimer's brazier, its iron tip glowing a dull, holy orange. I smelled the sanctified oils burning away, that mixture of incense and rot that the ecclesiarchy swears is purity. When the iron came down against my shoulder, I tried to remember my name. I failed. Pain cleanses, they tell us. Pain reveals truth. All it revealed was how small I had become. The sound of searing flesh echoed in the narrow chamber, accompanied by the mechanical drone of cogitators recording my rebirth. My name died there, drowned beneath the smell of my own burnt skin. The clerk didn't even flinch. He pressed a rune on his slate and my blood-slicked code appeared in the roster, glowing faintly. I had become a digit, a commodity of penance. Unit 72C, I was processed alongside hundreds of others, men and women stripped bare, wrapped in the same rough gray cloth, heads shaved to stubble. We stood in rows before the shrines of the Emperor, the candles sputtering in the recycled air. The priest who blessed us was blind, his sockets filled with wax and gold thread. His voice was a trembling drone, a prayer repeated too many times to still mean anything. May the light of his will burn away your sin. May your death serve as your redemption. We all said amen, though few of us believed. I think most just wanted to hear themselves speak one last time, before silence became permanent. After the ceremony, they herded us through the embarkation tunnels. The air was thick with the hum of engines and the stench of promethium. We were cargo now, loaded not into passenger holds but freight bays. I remember the sound of the shuttle's doors closing, an echo that felt final. The seats were metal benches bolted to the walls, chains dangling from their sides. Each of us was fitted with a collar, a dull gray band of adamantine studded with runes and a single crimson light at the front. The clerk had said something about explosive fail-safes, though his tone was that of a man reciting inventory. I remember the faint click as it locked around my throat, the vibration through the metal as the rune activated. That sound was the death of hope. I looked around the shuttle bay as the engines began to rumble. There were 71 of us, though one man's collar detonated before we even left the dock. He'd tried to remove it, or maybe he'd just scratched an itch. His head came apart like wet parchment, red mist painting the floor. None of us screamed. The clerk stepped over him, made a note on his slate, and called for a servitor to mop up the remains. 72 became 71. The light above us flickered as the shuttle disengaged from its moorings. Gravity shifted, pressing us into our seats. A few of the others murmured prayers. Others vomited. I just stared at the bulkhead in front of me where someone had carved a crude image into the metal. An aquila, its wings uneven, its beak chipped away. Beneath it were words scratched in shaking script. For the Emperor, even in damnation, I tried to believe them. I tried to imagine that death in his name could still mean something. But the longer I sat in that stink of oil and sweat, the more I realized how little faith survived in the dark. Across from me sat a woman with a brand like mine, her skin pale against the grime. She caught my gaze and smiled, a thin, broken smile that said she'd already accepted everything. Her lips moved, forming silent words I couldn't hear over the engines. Maybe she was praying. Maybe she was cursing. I envied her calm. Time lost all meaning in transit. The lumens dimmed, brightened, dimmed again. The air grew thicker, sour with unwashed bodies. The servitors moved through the aisles occasionally, distributing nutrient paste and recycled water. I ate when it was handed to me, not out of hunger but obedience. My stomach didn't matter anymore. My will didn't matter. I began to dream with my eyes open. Dreams of the world I came from, though I could no longer recall its name. There had been rain there, I think. Real rain. Not the chemical runoff that fell through the hive spires. I remembered the sound it made against tin roofs, the smell of it. Clean, almost sweet. That memory felt like heresy. When the shuttle finally broke through atmosphere, the walls trembled and the deck shuddered. The descent burned my bones. We landed hard. Hard enough that one of the weaker ones cracked his skull against the bulkhead. The servitors dragged him away without ceremony. The crimson light on his collar blinked once, then faded to black. Outside, the world was gray. They called it a theater of war, though there was no stage. No audience, no script, only mud and metal and endless noise. The landing zone was little more than a graveyard of machines. The air reeked of oil, ozone, and charred meat. Thunder rolled across the horizon, though it was not the voice of a storm but of artillery. We were lined up again, the way livestock might be before slaughter. Overseers in flat coats moved among us, their masks expressionless save for the vox grills that spat orders. Each of us was inspected, scanned, and reclassified according to physical condition. The healthy were marked for the trenches. The damaged were sent to logistics or servitor integration. A man ahead of me protested his assignment, said he wasn't fit for combat, that his eyes had been damaged in the mines. One of the overseers drew a sidearm and shot him through the jaw. The sound was quiet compared to the artillery, almost merciful. The body didn't even fall properly. It crumpled like paper, knees folding under dead weight. 2 servitors came and dragged him off, leaving a smear of blood in the dust. I didn't speak when they reached me. I didn't even breathe. Unit 72C, the overseer rasped, reading the code from the brand on my shoulder. Trench conscript. Penal battalion. He stamped a sigil onto a data slate and passed it to another clerk. I was given a las rifle that looked older than I was, its metal patched with welds and devotional inscriptions. Cleanse with fire, redeem with blood, read one engraving near the trigger. I traced the words with my thumb, feeling the grooves worn deep by generations of hands. We marched from the landing zone under the watch of gun servitors and overseers. The horizon was a blur of smoke and ruin. The ground trembled constantly, not from quakes but from the distant rhythm of bombardment. Every step we took stirred the mud, releasing the stench of decay beneath. Someone whispered beside me. A hoarse voice cracked from thirst. "You think they'll really let us go after this?" I didn't answer. Freedom was a word reserved for saints and corpses. When night came, the lumens on our collars glowed faintly red, a chain of lights across the dark like the eyes of a sleeping beast. We were told to dig our own quarters in the mud near the forward lines. The soil was wet and thick with something that wasn't just water. I didn't ask. The overseers watched from above, their rifles gleaming in the starlight. That first night I couldn't sleep. The noise was constant. Artillery in the distance, the scream of engines, the mechanical whine of servitors. But beneath all of it, there was something else, a low hum, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the world itself. I realized it was the detonator grid, the system that monitored our collars, ensuring no one strayed too far from their assigned perimeter. Every few seconds a pulse rippled through the network, a vibration in my neck that reminded me of my place. I wondered what would happen if I stepped beyond the invisible line. Part of me wanted to find out. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe fear is stronger than curiosity. Maybe death was too easy. The next morning we were given our first task, advance to the front trench and replace the fallen. The word fallen had a softness to it, almost gentle, but the reality was anything but. The forward trench was a charnel pit. The corpses had been stacked neatly against the walls, their collars still blinking red. Some had exploded, headless torsos slumped against the mud, blood mixed with rainwater. I tried not to look at their faces, but one of them looked like me. Not in truth, but in a way that felt true. The same shaved head, the same emptiness in the eyes. I reached out and closed his eyelids, though they didn't stay shut. A voice on the vox barked orders. We obeyed. We always obeyed. I don't remember how many days passed after that. In war, time becomes a lie. The sun rose and set behind smoke clouds, the rain came and went, and men died without ceremony. My hands blistered, my skin cracked, my rifle jammed, and still I fought. Each day I felt the weight of my code more than my own body. Unit 72C. Penance in flesh. Expendable in service, and yet, sometimes in the moments between shellfire, when the sky turned a pale sickly gray, I thought I heard something. A voice, not from the vox, not from the priests, not even from my own memory. Something vast, distant, and cold. It whispered through the static in my collar. Through the hum of the detonator grid, it said my name. My real name, only for a moment. Only once. Then the artillery began again and the world drowned it out. I haven't heard it since, but Chapter 2. Baptism by Last Fire. They woke us before dawn. Not that the word meant anything on this world. The sky was always a bruised shade of iron, the clouds low and fat with ash. The air stung when you breathed too deep, like swallowing rust. We were lined up in the trench's cold belly, our collars pulsing red in the half-light. The officers stood above us on the ramparts, silhouettes against the fog, their voices amplified through vox speakers. The words they spoke were holy, or so they claimed. By the grace of the God Emperor, you will wash away your sin and blood. There was no grace in their tone, only hunger. I remember the feel of my lasgun in my hands, heavy, oily, its grip worn smooth by dead men's palms. I checked the charge pack, though it hardly mattered. When the order came, we were expected to fire until the weapon jammed, then advance and die. Anything less was treachery. A commissar paced along the trench line, his black coat glistening with damp. His face was a pale wound beneath his cap, eyes hidden behind lenses that reflected the glow of the collars. He said nothing at first, just stared. We all kept our heads bowed, afraid to meet his gaze. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost intimate. "The Emperor is watching," he said. "He sees every cowardice, every hesitation, every unworthy thought. Remember that when the time comes." Then he smiled, and the smile was colder than the morning air. The sirens began to wail, a long, ascending note that seemed to stretch forever. We clambered up the trench ladders, boots slipping in the muck, lasguns clutched to our chests. The officers herded us forward with shock prods, their tips crackling blue. I caught the scent of burnt cloth and skin as one struck a man beside me who stumbled. "Advance," someone shouted. "Advance in his name!" We screamed the words back, though they tasted like lies. The field before us was a graveyard of machines and bones. The heretics were waiting, silhouettes in the fog, chanting in voices that sounded too human to belong to mortals. Their banners were tattered and obscene, painted with shapes that twisted if you looked too long. I saw one of them lift a blade the size of a scythe, its edge dripping with something that hissed when it hit the mud. Then the last fire began. The first volley turned the air into lightning. Red bolts cut through the fog, sizzling past us, burning holes through flesh and metal alike. Men fell without a sound, their collars blinking faster as if counting down. I fired blindly, my trigger finger trembling. Each shot burned the smell of ozone into the back of my throat. The commissar's voice barked through the vox. "Forward! For the Emperor!" We ran. No formation, no strategy, just a flood of condemned souls thrown into the storm. The ground shook beneath the weight of our charge. The heretics screamed praises to their false gods, their laughter carrying through the chaos. Some wore masks of bone. Others had carved their devotion directly into their skin. One, I swear, was laughing even as his torso was split apart by a lasbolt. Men exploded beside me, some from enemy fire, others from disobedience. I saw one turn and flee, only to vanish in a flash of red light as his collar detonated. His headless corpse stumbled a few steps before collapsing. The blast peppered my face with warm droplets that weren't rain. The officers didn't slow. They drove us harder, shouting litanies between the crack of shock prods. I tripped over a body. A woman, face half buried in mud, her hand still clutching her weapon. Her collar light was dark. For a heartbeat, I envied her. Then something hit the ground beside me, spraying dirt. I looked up to see one of the heretics looming over the trench lip we were trying to reach. His eyes burned with some unholy light, his mouth moving in a soundless chant. He raised his blade and I fired without aiming. The lasbolt punched through his jaw and out the back of his skull. He fell, twitching, the light in his eyes fading to nothing. For a moment I thought I felt the Emperor's hand guiding mine. Then I remembered what kind of man I was, and the thought curdled into shame. We reached the first line of their defenses, crude barricades made from broken armor and bones. The smell there was worse than anything I had known before. Burnt flesh, rot, the metallic tang of blood turned to steam. It clung to the lungs like sin. Someone shouted for grenades, and I threw one without thinking. The explosion ripped a hole through the barricade, sending shards of bone and meat flying. I saw pieces of people rain down in the fog, landing soft as feathers. The commissar appeared through the smoke, his coat fluttering like a black banner. He raised his bolt pistol, aimed at a man cowering behind a fallen servitor, and fired. The man's head vanished in a red mist. "Cowards die first," the commissar said calmly. "Now advance." I moved because my legs obeyed him before my mind could protest. The battle had become a blur of shapes and colors. Red, gray, black. My laser gun hissed in my hands until the charge pack ran dry, and then I fought with the bayonet thrusting at shadows. The heretics screamed prayers to gods whose names I couldn't understand. They were fast, strong, wrong. One grabbed me by the collar, dragging me close. His breath stank of copper and incense. He whispered something, 2 words I can still hear when I close my eyes. "We're free." Then his throat opened beneath my blade. We pushed forward by inches, bodies piling in the mud. The ground steamed with blood and the fog turned crimson. The air was alive with screams and static. Every heartbeat was a hammer blow, every breath a knife. I don't know how long it lasted. Hours maybe, or a lifetime. When it ended, I was kneeling in the muck, my laser gun empty, my ears ringing. Around me the dead lay stacked in silent heaps. The heretics were gone, or maybe we had become them. The officers called it victory, though nothing about it felt like triumph. The commissar walked among us, his boots splashing through the blood. He spoke to no one. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to remind us that even in survival, we were property. One of the wounded begged for a medic. The commissar drew his pistol and gave him the Emperor's mercy. I looked away. They gathered us afterward in the remains of what had once been a manufactorum. The air inside was thick with smoke and the sweet, cloying stink of burnt metal. A priest recited the litany of cleansing over the vox, his voice trembling. We were told we had been baptized in holy fire, that our sins were lighter now that the Emperor had seen our devotion. I didn't feel lighter. I felt hollow. I cleaned my laser gun in silence, though the grime never really came off. My hands shook too much. The woman beside me, the one who had smiled on the shuttle, was gone. I didn't see her fall, but I saw her collar later, half buried in the mud, still blinking faintly. I crushed it under my boot until the light went out. Night came again, though the world never truly darkened. The horizon burned constantly, a reminder that somewhere else others were dying just as we had. I lay on my back in the mud, staring at the flicker of the battlefield fires. My collar hummed softly, a lullaby of obedience. I thought about what the heretic had said. "We're free." The words gnawed at me. What did freedom mean when the only choice was how you died? Sleep never came. The memories did. The screams. The smell. The way the mud had swallowed the blood until it looked alive. I realized then that death wasn't my escape. It was my purpose. We weren't sent to die because we were sinners. We were sent to die because someone had to. The Emperor demanded sacrifice, and the Imperium was happy to oblige. So I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, not to be saved, but to be useful. And somewhere beneath the hum of the detonator grid, I thought I heard laughter. Do you want me to continue to Chapter 3, the Commissar's Lesson? Got it. We'll continue in the same grimdark, oppressive, first-person tone for Chapter 3, the Commissar's Lesson, Chapter 3, the Commissar's Lesson. We woke to screams again, not from the enemy this time, but from one of our own. The morning fog still clung to the trenches like a shroud, thick and cold enough to taste. Somewhere down the line, someone had tried to run during the night. Maybe he thought the darkness would hide him, or maybe he'd just gone mad and started walking. Either way, the detonator grid caught him before he reached the ridge. The explosion was small, almost delicate, a bloom of red light swallowed by mist. When the echo faded, all that remained was the smell. Burnt flesh has a sweetness to it, cloying and wrong like spoiled fruit left too long in the sun. It drifted through the trenches, mixing with the ever-present reek of oil, mud, and human rot. None of us said a word. We didn't have to. Every collar in the line glowed a little brighter, as if feeding off the lesson. The commissar came not long after. He arrived in silence, flanked by 2 overseers carrying shock prods and a servitor dragging a data slate altar behind it. His boots sank into the sludge with each step, but his expression never changed. Even filth refused to cling to him, as if the mud itself feared punishment. He stopped where the remains of the deserter still steamed. Bits of bone and sinew were embedded in the trench wall. One hand, what was left of it, hung from a strand of skin like a torn banner. The commissar turned to face us. "Discipline," he said, voice carrying easily over the crackling Vox units. Discipline is faith made flesh. He gestured toward the smear on the wall. This man lost faith, and so his flesh was unmade. We bowed our heads, not out of reverence, but instinct. If you avoided his gaze, you were less likely to be chosen for demonstration. But today, the commissar wasn't satisfied with just one corpse. He began to walk the line, slow and deliberate, the servitor's treads grinding behind him. The overseers followed like carrion birds. He stopped beside one man, Unit 64B, I think his code was. A big man, shoulders broad from years of labor, eyes sunken from lack of sleep. The commissar studied him for a long time before speaking. "You hesitated yesterday," he said. The man froze. "Sir? At the barricade." "You hesitated. You lowered your weapon for 3 seconds. My laser gun jammed, sir. I was trying to—" The bolt pistol roared and the man's skull disintegrated. No hesitation. No warning. Just a wet pop, and the faint patter of rain as his blood mingled with the drizzle. The commissar holstered his weapon and continued walking. 3 seconds, he said. 3 seconds of hesitation can damn an entire regiment. He stopped in front of me next. I could feel the cold shadow of him even before I dared to lift my eyes. The barrel of his pistol hovered at chest height, just close enough that I could see my reflection in the polished casing. Pale, gaunt, eyes wide. "Unit 72C, he said softly. "Yes, Commissar?" "You did not hesitate yesterday." I didn't answer. I didn't know if silence was respect or insolence. "Tell me, Unit 72C, he continued. "Do you know why you still live?" The correct answer was obedience, but the word caught in my throat. "Because the Emperor wills it," I finally said. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that made you wish he hadn't. "Good, remember that." Then he turned away. That was his lesson. Not mercy, not redemption, just fear refined into order. After he left, the overseers ordered us to drag the bodies away. We tossed them into the sump pits behind the trench where the ground was soft and hungry. The servitors followed to catalog the remains, each piece tagged, recorded, forgotten. The mud swallowed the last of the blood before noon. By evening, the rain had turned heavy again. It always did after a cleansing. We huddled in our dugouts, our collars humming faintly in the dark. The air was heavy with damp and rust. Water dripped through the cracks above, trailing down the walls like tears. Someone started whispering a prayer. Not to the Emperor, at least not the version of him we were allowed to know. The words were old, guttural, more plea than litany. The others listened, too tired to stop him. The sound was almost soothing until the overseer heard it. He didn't speak. He just raised his shock prod and drove it into the man's ribs. The scream echoed down the line. The rest of us pretended we hadn't heard. That night I dreamt again. The Emperor's light came to me, but it wasn't warm. It wasn't golden or radiant or merciful. It was cold, so cold it hurt to look at. It burned like frostbite, stripping flesh from bone, faith from thought. I saw a vast shape moving within it, all wings and eyes and fire. It spoke, but the words were drowned in static. When I woke, my collar was glowing faintly as if it had heard the same voice. We were ordered to march before sunrise. The fog hadn't lifted, and the ground sucked at our boots as we moved. The air stank of ozone and decay. We marched past the ruins of the manufactorum where we'd fought before. The bodies were gone, but their outlines remained. Stains in the mud, bones ground into the soil. No one spoke. The only sound was the shuffle of boots and the distant thunder of guns. At midday, we stopped near a broken shrine. Once it must have been beautiful. Marble angels lay shattered in the muck, their wings broken, faces eroded by acid rain. The priest accompanying us recited the Catechism of Endurance, his voice trembling as he struggled to remember the verses. The commissar interrupted him. "Faith is not memory," he said. "It is action." He drew his bolt pistol again and pointed it toward the horizon. "The heretics have taken the upper ridge. Your duty is to take it back. Fail, and you will join the unfaithful." A few of us glanced at one another. None dared to ask how. When the assault began, it was worse than the first. The ridge was fortified with rusted gun emplacements and the corpses of those who'd tried before us. We charged uphill through fire and mud, slipping on the dead. The commissar stood behind us, firing his pistol whenever someone slowed. I didn't remember pulling the trigger. I didn't remember reaching the top. I only remember the sound of screaming. Ours, theirs, the world's. When the battle ended, only a handful of us were left standing. The commissar inspected us one by one, his gaze clinical. "Good," he said at last. You learn quickly. Pain is a fine instructor. Then he ordered us to collect the dead and burn them. The flames were small at first, struggling against the damp. Then the promethium caught and the pyre roared. The heat washed over us, searing the grime into our skin. The smell was unbearable. Flesh, fat, and cloth melting into one another until everything smelled the same. Sin, smoke, and sacrifice. The commissar watched, hands clasped behind his back. "This," he said, "is redemption." I stared into the fire until my eyes watered. I didn't feel redeemed. I didn't feel anything at all. When night fell, I sat alone by the trench wall, staring at the faint pulse of my collar. Each blink was a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I wondered how many men had lived and died under the same rhythm. We marched now not for glory, not even for forgiveness. We marched because stopping meant death, because motion was the only proof that we were still breathing. And maybe, in the eyes of the Emperor, that was enough. Do you want me to continue to Chapter 4, The Filth of the Trenches? Perfect. I'll make Chapter 4, The Filth of the Trenches, even more claustrophobic, hallucinatory, and decayed. A slow suffocation of the soul amid rot, ritual, and madness. Chapter 4. The Filth of the Trenches. I forgot what clean air tasted like. The trenches had a smell that became your world, a wet, rancid thing made of rust, corpse flesh, and promethium fumes. It got into the skin, into the tongue. You could wash your hands in rainwater or scrub them raw with lye. But the stench always came back. It was as if the ground itself breathed rot. We lived inside that breath. Days bled into each other, colorless and cruel. The sun was a rumor, hidden behind endless sheets of smoke. The rain never stopped. It didn't fall, it wept. A thin, greasy drizzle that carried ash from the bombardments and slicked everything with decay. It mixed with the mud and blood until they were the same thing. We dug deeper every week, carving new warrens into the earth. The higher trenches filled too quickly with the dead. The lower ones stayed dry enough to sleep in if you didn't mind sharing space with vermin. Rats fat as a man's wrist scuttled over our boots, feasting on whatever flesh the rain hadn't washed away. Some of the men trapped them, roasted them over lasgun batteries, and called it a feast. I stopped eating after I bit into one and found a human tooth inside its gut. The sergeants still made us repeat the imperial litanies at dawn and dusk. Their voices were thin and hollow, echoing off the mud walls like the prayers of the damned. We all mouthed the words in unison. Through duty, redemption. Through suffering, purity. Through death, salvation. The sound of it was mechanical, a noise we made to keep from screaming. By then, faith had become just another habit. Like cleaning your rifle or checking the charge pack. You didn't believe, you just did it because the alternative was thinking. And thinking led to despair. I began to notice things, small at first. Shapes moving in the corners of my vision. Whispers that rose from the sump pits when the wind was right. Once I woke to find my lasgun missing and a dozen new carvings on the trench wall above me. Crude symbols of wings and eyes, drawn in what looked like blood. The others swore they hadn't seen who did it. The commissar said it was heresy. The priest said it was madness. I wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. We slept in shifts, if sleep can still be called that. The ground was always damp, the air too thick with the stench of mold and rot. I remember lying there one night, cheek pressed against the mud, feeling it pulse faintly beneath me. I thought it was my heartbeat at first. Then I realized it wasn't. The earth itself was breathing. Sometimes, when the shelling stopped long enough for silence to settle, I could hear it more clearly. A slow, sucking sound deep below. It reminded me of something feeding. The medici told us it was just gas pockets shifting underground. But the medici hadn't been human for a long time. Half his face was augmetic steel and the rest looked embalmed. I didn't trust anything that could no longer bleed. One night during rations, a man named Frayne started laughing. It wasn't the kind of laugh you share over drink. It was high, sharp, and wet. He said he could hear the Emperor's voice whispering from the mud. Said the Emperor forgave us that he had descended into the trenches himself to walk among his faithful. The commissar shot him in the stomach. "Blasphemy," he said, reloading calmly as Frayne writhed and coughed blood. "The Emperor does not crawl through the dirt. We left the body where it fell. The next morning it was gone. The rats had taken him, or something else had. The days that followed blurred into one long fever. The rain got heavier. The sky seemed closer. pressing down on us like a lid. Every sound echoed strangely. The rattle of equipment, the hiss of last fire, the occasional shriek when a trench segment collapsed and buried men alive. We worked with our hands to dig them out, but the mud was too deep, too greedy. It clung to everything. Once I managed to grab a man's wrist as he sank, but his skin tore free from the bone before I could pull him up. His eyes didn't close until the muck reached his forehead. After that, the trenches felt hungry. We began to call them the Maw. The priest said it was heresy to name the ground, that only the emperor could name his creations. But even he began to flinch when the wind howled through the tunnels, carrying voices that sounded far too human. Sleep became impossible. The bombardments above us never truly stopped, but even in the rare silences I heard breathing. Not mine, not anyone's near me. Something slower, patient, watching. I started talking to the dead to keep sane. Their faces lingered in the mud, the ones we buried too shallow, the ones the rats hadn't finished. I'd whisper to them, asking if they'd found peace. None ever answered, but sometimes I thought I saw their mouths move. The commissar caught me once. He didn't shoot me. He just stared for a long time and said, "Keep praying, Unit 72C, only the faithful survive the Maw." That night I dreamed again. In my dream the trenches were alive. The walls pulsed like muscle, slick and warm. The air shimmered with the hum of machinery buried deep beneath the soil. I saw shapes moving inside the mud, human at first, then not. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the red of the collars. One reached for me and spoke without sound. "We built this place for you." I woke screaming, half buried, the mud packed over my legs. Someone had collapsed the wall during the night. I clawed my way out, gasping, covered in filth. My collar light flickered, pulsing irregularly, almost like it was breathing with me. When the dawn came, the priest was dead. His body was propped up against the trench wall, arms outstretched in mock benediction. Someone had carved scripture into his chest with a bayonet. The words were nonsense, half imperial, half something older. The commissar ordered the body burned without ceremony. His voice was flat when he spoke, as if even he had stopped believing his own orders. By then, most of us had stopped speaking altogether. We communicated in gestures and nods, our throats raw from the damp air. The silence became another kind of language, one the Maw seemed to understand. Sometimes I thought the mud was whispering back. The rations grew worse. The paste we were fed had maggots in it, some living, some not. I remember watching one wriggle beneath the surface of the gray sludge, curling like a letter written in pain. I ate it anyway. Hunger doesn't care about disgust. Disease spread faster than bullets. Coughs turned to blood. Skin peeled from hands. Some men started losing their teeth, their gums blackening like burnt paper. The medici worked in silence, injecting serums that smelled of rust and vinegar. None of it helped. I began to recognize the dying by their eyes. There was a moment when they all saw something, a flicker of recognition, a kind of awe. Then they were gone. The commissar called it faith. The rest of us called it the Maw claiming its due. Weeks passed, or maybe months. I no longer measured time by the sun, only by how many times my collar's rune dimmed and brightened while I stared into the dark. My dreams and my waking began to blur. I saw faces in the puddles, heard footsteps when no one walked. One night I found myself standing waist-deep in the sump, staring at the reflection of my own collar light rippling across the water. For a heartbeat I thought it was a halo. Then I realized how foolish that was. The Emperor's light didn't reach here, only the Maws did, and I began to think, perhaps they were the same thing. Do you want me to continue to Chapter 5? The Ghosts of the Fallen? Excellent, I'll continue with Chapter 5. The Ghosts of the Fallen, blending the psychological and the supernatural, keeping it ambiguous whether the ghosts are madness, memory, or something that crawls out of the warp. It will remain first-person, grim-dark, 2,000 words, oppressive, and confessional in tone. Chapter 5. The Ghosts of the Fallen. The dead stopped staying buried. At first it was only in dreams. They came in fragments, faces without flesh, eyes without light. I saw them sitting in the mud beside me, mouths moving soundlessly. I thought it was the fever or the toxins in the air. We'd all been coughing blood for weeks. The trenches were half disease and half prayer by then. But then I saw them when I was awake. The first was Frayne, the one who'd claimed the Emperor spoke to him from the mud before the commissar shot him. I woke one night to find him crouched at the edge of my dugout, half of his skull missing, the wound glowing faintly like a dying coal. He wasn't breathing, but his eyes moved, tracking me. He didn't speak, but I understood him. His mouth formed the word coward. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, he was gone. After that, the others came. At first, they appeared in the corners of my vision, familiar shapes half glimpsed in the smoke. Men I'd fought beside, men I'd helped bury. The woman from the shuttle, the one who'd smiled before the first battle, she was there too, standing by the sump pits, her collar still blinking faintly in the dark. Every time I blinked, they drew closer. The maw had grown quieter by then. The bombardment still came, but farther away. The silence between the shells felt wrong, thick, almost expectant. Even the rats had vanished. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for us to notice what we'd become. The commissar didn't. He walked the trenches like a shadow, pistol always ready, voice calm. He didn't sleep anymore, or if he did it standing up, eyes open. When we looked at him too long, our collars hummed. The priest's replacement arrived a few days later. A man more machine than flesh, voice filtered through a Vox grill that turned every prayer into static. He said the dead were visions sent by the Emperor, proof that he still watched us. But I didn't believe him. The dead didn't look holy. They looked hungry. One evening, while cleaning my laser gun, I noticed a handprint on the metal. It was smeared in black mud, 5 distinct fingers, too large to be mine. I tried to wipe it off, but it had sunk into the finish as though burned there. That night I dreamed of a sea of hands reaching from the dirt, pulling at my legs, dragging me down. When I woke, my boots were half buried in fresh mud. I didn't remember how I got there. The others were changing too. Unit 64B, before the commissar shot him, used to say that every man had 2 souls, one that fought and one that watched. By now, only the watchers remained. Our bodies moved, fired, dug, ate when ordered, but the watching parts, they'd started to whisper. We called them the echoes. I heard mine for the first time during a lull in the shelling. The trench was quiet except for the drip of rain through the broken duckboards. I was cleaning my weapon when I heard it, my own voice, soft and hoarse, speaking from somewhere behind me. You're already dead, it said. I froze, turned. There was nothing there. Only the red pulse of my collar reflected on the wet walls. The voice came again, closer. You just haven't stopped breathing yet. I didn't sleep that night. By the next morning, 3 men had shot themselves. Their collars didn't detonate. The overseer said the devices had malfunctioned. But I saw the truth. The runes still pulsed faintly, as if feeding on something unseen. The dead didn't rot anymore, they just faded, skin crumbling to dust that dissolved into the mud. I stopped calling it the maw. I started calling it the grave that breathes. Because it did. Every night the ground moved. You could feel it shift beneath your boots, slow and rhythmic. Sometimes I thought I saw faces pushing up from below, straining through the earth like drowning men beneath ice. If I closed my eyes, I could hear them whispering. They knew my name, the one I'd lost before the branding. They said it over and over, soft as prayer. When I told the commissar, he said, "The Emperor tests the faithful through delusion," but he didn't look convinced. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his bolt pistol trembled when he held it. That night, the whispers grew louder. I found myself wandering the trench, barefoot, the mud cold between my toes. The red lights of the collars dotted the darkness like candles at a wake. I stopped near the burial pit, the one where we threw Frayne. It was empty. The walls of the pit pulsed faintly, as if something inside was breathing through them. I leaned closer, and for a moment I thought I saw movement, a pale shape writhing just beneath the surface. When I blinked, it was gone. The next day, the commissar ordered a purge. He said heresy had taken root among the ranks, that too many were whispering to the dead. The overseers moved through the trench with shock prods and chains. Men were dragged out and executed on the spot. I didn't resist. I couldn't tell anymore whether I was guilty. The executions didn't stop the whispers. That night I saw them all together for the first time. The ghosts, the echoes, the dead. They stood along the trench walls like mourners at a funeral, Some wore the faces of my comrades. Others were little more than silhouettes. Their eyes glowed faintly red like the collars. One stepped forward. It was the woman from the shuttle again, though her body was more shadow than flesh now. "Do you remember me?" she asked. Her voice wasn't sound, it was vibration, a tremor in my bones. I wanted to answer, but my throat wouldn't work. "You fired first," she said. "You killed without looking. You earned your number." I tried to speak, to say I didn't remember, but I did. I remembered the battle, the panic, the figure running toward me through the fog. I hadn't seen the collar light in time. She smiled then. Not cruelly, almost with pity. "None of us escape," she whispered. "Not even in death." She reached out her hand, and for a moment I felt warmth. Real warmth. The first I'd felt since the branding. Then she was gone, and the cold rushed back like a tide. I sat in the mud until dawn. My laser gun lay forgotten beside me. The others didn't ask where I'd been. They didn't have to. They'd started seeing their own ghosts by then. The commissar tried to hold formation the next day, but even he was faltering. His hands shook. His voice cracked mid-prayer. He fired his pistol at shadows that no one else could see. When the bombardment started again, it was almost a relief. The world turned white, then red, then noise. I remember the heat of it, the pressure, the smell of burning oil and blood. When I came to, the trench had collapsed. I was pinned beneath a support beam, my legs buried. The smoke cleared slowly, revealing shapes moving through the haze. At first I thought it was the enemy. Then I recognized the faces. The dead had returned to dig us out. They moved silently, their hands passing through the debris as if it were mist. One of them knelt beside me. Frayne again, his half-face lit by the fires. "Get up," he said. "I can't." "You can," he replied. "You're not done yet." I tried to move, and the beam lifted, though there was no one living to help me. I crawled free, gasping. The ghosts watched, their faces serene. Then they turned and began to walk toward the horizon into the smoke. None looked back. When I tried to follow, my collar hummed, a low warning tone. The rune flared bright red. I stopped. The ghosts vanished into the distance, dissolving into the ash. The commissar found me hours later. His coat was torn, his face burned. He said nothing as he passed. His eyes were empty, his collar light, steady, and calm. I think he'd seen them too. Now when I sleep, if I sleep, I hear them marching. Not toward the enemy, but through us, beneath us. The ground trembles with their passing. They are not gone. They never left. They're waiting for us to join them. Sometimes, when the night is long enough, I see them standing at the edge of the trench again, motionless, heads bowed in prayer. They do not accuse anymore. They only watch, and I wonder which side of the dirt I'm truly on. Do you want me to continue to Chapter 6, The Glorious Charge? Understood. I'll combine both tones for Chapter 6, The Glorious Charge. A slow-motion apocalypse seen through the eyes of one dying soul, trapped inside a close-up nightmare of smoke, fire, and faith turned to ruin. Chapter 6, The Glorious Charge. They told us it would be our absolution. The commissar stood upon a mound of corpses, his coat torn and black with soot, his voice carrying over the trench like a funeral bell. The fortress ahead of us loomed through the fog, a monolith of iron and stone, its walls veined with fire and smoke. "Take the fortress," he said. "And the Emperor himself will know your names." I almost laughed. I hadn't had a name for so long that the idea felt obscene. Behind him the sky burned. Orbital bombardments had turned the clouds to molten glass. The air was too thick to breathe properly. Every inhalation tasted like metal and old blood. The priest, what was left of him, was still alive, though his voice was gone. His vox implant emitted a constant crackle of scripture. Faith through annihilation. We all knelt out of habit, heads bowed in mock reverence. The mud around our boots bubbled with chemical heat. They gave us new rations of stimulants before the assault. Bitter ampoules of something that burned all the way down. After drinking it, the world sharpened until it cut. The air shimmered. My heart hammered so violently I thought the collar might detonate from the pulse. Then came the signal. A shriek from the vox horns, long and metallic. The overseers lined the trench walls, shock prods raised, collars linked to their control slates. We climbed. I remember the first step out of the trench, the world above roaring like a furnace. The light from the bombardment turned the mud to mirror. I could see my reflection for a heartbeat, pale, gaunt, mouth open in a wordless scream. Then the artillery struck. The ground convulsed. Chunks of earth and bone flew through the air. Someone beside me shouted, and then he was gone, a red smear where a man had been. I ran without thinking, laser gun clutched tight, lungs burning. The fortress grew larger with each step, impossibly vast. Its walls were pitted with gunfire, its gates belching smoke. From its ramparts came the enemy's chants, deep, booming, and joyous. They sang to their gods while they killed for them. Our charge was not formation, it was frenzy. A flood of bodies, broken and unwilling, driven by the certainty of death. The commissar's voice followed us through the vox, distorted but unrelenting. Die well and you will be remembered. I saw a man fall to his knees, clutching his chest. His collar lit white-hot and his head vanished in an instant. The blast sprayed fire across my face. I didn't wipe it away. I couldn't tell where the blood ended and my skin began. The air screamed. Last fire rained down from the walls like judgment. I fired back blindly. Each shot burned my shoulder with recoil, each bolt lighting the smoke red. I don't think I hit anything. The stimulants blurred time. The world became slow and endless. I saw men running, falling, screaming, each motion stretched into eternity. The sky cracked open under the force of orbital fire, and for a moment, I thought I saw the Emperor's light descending. But it wasn't light. It was debris, ships, bodies, metal, ash. By the time we reached the fortress gates, half of us were gone. The ground was carpeted with corpses. Some still twitched, their collars flashing erratically like dying stars. The mud steamed with blood. An explosion threw me into the air. I hit the ground hard enough to see white. My ears rang with static. I crawled through smoke and flame until I found cover behind a shattered transport. The hull was etched with devotional runes, now warped and blackened. Through the smoke I saw the commissar advancing. He walked like a prophet through hellfire, bolt pistol raised, cape aflame. Every time he fired, another man fell, enemy or ally, I couldn't tell. His voice cut through the chaos. Forward in the Emperor's name. The fortress gates began to open. Not because we breached them, but because something inside wanted us to enter. A sound poured out from within, low and pulsing like a heartbeat. The air vibrated with it. Men stumbled as it hit them, clutching their heads. Some screamed. Others began to laugh. I kept walking. I don't know why. Maybe because stopping would mean I'd finally realize what we were walking into. The interior was worse than I imagined. The walls bled light. Machinery of unknown design pulsed like organs, dripping oil that smelled of incense and rot. The floor was slick, covered in a film of red-gray slurry that hissed underfoot. At the center of the hall was an altar made of broken armor and human bones. Around it, heretics knelt in prayer, their voices rising in a chant that didn't sound human. The commissar raised his pistol. For the Emperor, he screamed. We charged. What followed was less a battle and more an eruption. Bolts, blades, screams, and light all fused together into a single endless roar. I stabbed until my bayonet broke, fired until the pack melted in my hands. Every man I killed seemed to rise again behind me, face twisted into something inhuman. The air filled with laughter, not from the enemy, not from us, but from the fortress itself. The walls trembled, shedding dust and bone. I saw the woman again, the ghost from before. She stood amid the carnage, untouched. Do you see it now? She whispered. What? The truth. This isn't a battle. It's a sacrifice. And she was right. The commissar fell moments later, a blade through his chest. He fired one last bolt into the air before collapsing. His blood steamed where it hit the floor. His eyes were open, staring upward as if he'd finally seen something worth dying for. The fortress began to shake. The altar pulsed with light, brighter and brighter until it was unbearable. I dropped my weapon, covering my face. Then I realized what I was standing on. The floor wasn't stone, it was flesh. The whole fortress was alive, built from the remains of the fallen, fused into a single breathing thing. I felt it shudder beneath me, heard it whisper through the metal. Welcome home. I tried to run, but my boots stuck fast. The ground tightened around me like hands. I looked down and saw fingers pushing up through the sludge. Human fingers, slick and black, gripping my legs. They weren't pulling me down. They were holding me still. Around me, the others screamed as the floor consumed them. Some begged the Emperor for mercy. Others laughed until their throats tore. I didn't do either. I just watched as the light grew and the fortress began to sing. The song was beautiful in a way that hurt. It was a sound of endings, of blood becoming prayer. And then for the briefest instant I understood. We weren't here to conquer. We were here to complete. Our blood was mortar. Our bones scripture. The fortress wasn't the enemy's stronghold. It was the Imperium's altar, and we were the offering. The last thing I remember is the collar detonating, not as an explosion but as light, pure, and searing. It filled my vision, my lungs, my skull, and in that final brilliance I saw the Emperor's face, not a man, not even a god. Just light, infinite empty light, and I realized he wasn't watching, he was feeding. Then everything went white. Do you want me to continue to Chapter 7, The Broken Creed? Understood. I'll write Chapter 7, The Broken Creed as both, the hollow illusion of freedom after the slaughter, quickly unraveling into deeper despair. The tone will be first-person, confessional, and bleakly intimate, the slow unwinding of a soul that realizes even liberation is another kind of cage. Chapter 7, The Broken Creed. When I woke, the war was silent. The smoke had settled into the sky like a ceiling of ash. No gunfire, no screaming, no commissar shouting prayers into the void, just the faint hiss of cooling metal and the low moan of the wind moving through ruins. I was lying in what used to be the fortress courtyard, though it didn't look like stone anymore. Everything had fused together, metal, bone, and flesh hardened into a single black shell. My collar still blinked faintly, but the hum of the detonator grid was gone. I tapped the rune and heard nothing. For the first time since the branding, I was alone. The battlefield stretched before me like a wound that refused to close. The trenches were gone, swallowed by collapse. The air shimmered with heat and the ghost of ozone. All around me lay bodies, some imperial, some heretic, most unrecognizable. The mud had claimed them all equally. The commissar's corpse was among them. I found him half buried near the altar, his face upturned toward the scorched sky. His eyes were open and glassy, reflecting the dead light of the fires. I wanted to close them, but my hands wouldn't move. There was something obscene about touching him now. His pistol was still in his grip. The symbol of the Aquila on its casing had melted, warped into something like a pair of broken wings. I took it anyway. Not as a weapon. As a memory. The others, what few were left, began to crawl from the wreckage one by one. Unit 19F missing an arm. 103D blind from flash burns. A dozen of us in total. We gathered in silence, the red lights of our collars flickering like dying embers. No one spoke the Emperor's name. We just stood there, waiting for orders that would never come. After a while, we started walking. Not toward anything, just away. Away from the fortress, away from the smell of charred blood and ozone, away from the sound of the dead still settling into the earth. The land beyond was nothing but ruin, shell craters filled with black water, the remains of manufactorums twisted into skeletal shapes, towers collapsed inward like broken ribs. The air shimmered with radiation and faith long since burned out. I don't know how long we walked. The light never changed. It wasn't day or night anymore, just a constant dull glow as if the world was lit by the last embers of a dying sun. At some point, Unit 19F began to cry. Not loudly, not even with words, just soft animal sobs. We didn't comfort him. None of us knew how. When he finally stopped, I realized he wasn't breathing anymore. His collar light had gone dark. I envied him. We found shelter in the ruins of an Imperial outpost, a skeleton of plasteel walls and rusted cogitators. The Imperial Creed was still stenciled on the far wall, though the words were half melted by fire. Obedience is salvation. It felt like mockery. We built a fire from what we could find, broken splinters of rifle stocks, the shredded remnants of banners. The flames were weak, blue, almost reluctant. We sat around it like pilgrims at a shrine that had forgotten its god. No one prayed. I stared at the fire until the shapes in it began to move. Faces flickered in the blue light. The woman from the shuttle, the commissar, the ones who died beside me. They whispered softly, not words but breaths. The sound reminded me of confession. Unit 103D began to laugh. He pointed toward the fire, eyes milky, tears cutting lines through the soot on his cheeks. He's gone, he said. The Emperor's gone. We've been fighting shadows. He wasn't wrong, but hearing it aloud was heresy. I raised the commissar's pistol and pointed it at him. My hands were steady. You don't have to, he said. I know. I fired anyway. The sound was deafening in the stillness. The shot echoed across the ruins, bouncing off metal and stone until it faded into the sky. The smell of burnt flesh lingered long after. The others didn't react. They just stared into the fire, blank and empty. Later, when I couldn't sleep, I went outside. The air was colder now. The fortress still loomed in the distance, its outline faint in the fog. I could see faint lights moving within it, slow, pulsing, rhythmic. The fortress was still alive. I wondered if it was feeding on us even now. I looked at the pistol in my hand and thought about ending it. One squeeze, one final act of defiance. But then I remembered the commissar's words. Discipline is faith made flesh. And I realized that even my death would serve the Imperium. So I didn't. The next morning, Unit 43H was gone. We found his collar half buried near the outpost gate, still blinking. The rune had been altered somehow, twisted into a new pattern. I didn't recognize the symbols, but they made the back of my head ache to look at. That was when I began to understand. There was no freedom here. There never had been. We weren't prisoners because of the collars. We were prisoners because we believed the collars meant something. The Emperor's creed had been built on obedience. We'd mistaken it for faith. When I closed my eyes, I saw him. Not as a man, not even as a god, but as a machine made of endless mouths whispering orders into eternity. A god who didn't love, didn't hate, didn't even see, just consumed. That night I tore at the collar until my neck bled. The metal wouldn't break, but the light dimmed. I felt something shift inside it, a pulse, faint and human like a heartbeat. Maybe it was mine. Maybe it wasn't. When I slept, I dreamed of the fortress again, but this time it was empty. The walls were silent. The altar was cold. The corpses were gone. I walked through the halls and every step echoed with the sound of my own voice, whispering prayers I didn't remember learning. At the far end of the chamber, where the altar had been, I saw a mirror. My reflection was wearing the commissar's coat. The brand on my shoulder burned bright through the fabric, 72C, but below it, new words had been carved into the flesh, redeemed. I woke screaming, clawing at my shoulder, but there was nothing there. Only the old scar, red and raw. The others watched me in silence. None asked what was wrong. They all had their own ghosts now. We kept walking, though there was nowhere left to go. The outpost collapsed behind us as if it too was tired of pretending. The world grew quieter each day. Even the wind seemed to fade. Once I thought I saw Imperial banners fluttering on the horizon, reinforcements maybe, or salvation. But when we reached them, they were just corpses strung on poles, their bodies painted gold to look like saints. The gold had flaked away in the rain, revealing rot beneath. By then, I'd stopped believing in rescue. Freedom had turned out to be nothing more than another kind of servitude, the kind where you had to decide how to keep walking when every reason had rotted away. And yet, somehow I kept going, because movement, even aimless, still meant I was alive, at least I think I was. Sometimes, when I catch my reflection in the puddles, I see someone else looking back, a man in a commissar's coat, eyes bright with holy fire, mouth moving in silent prayer. Maybe it's memory. Maybe it's prophecy. Maybe it's the part of me the Imperium couldn't kill. I don't pray anymore, but sometimes, when the wind cuts through the ruins just right, I whisper I am still here, and the world whispers back, not words. Just sound, just breath, just the endless broken rhythm of the Imperium's heart. Do you want me to continue to Chapter 8, The Emperor's Shadow, the final chapter? Sure. Here's Chapter 8, The Emperor's Shadow on its own again, as a complete standalone ending in the same grim, first-person tone. Chapter 8. The Emperor's Shadow. They found us at dawn, if dawn could still be called that here. The sky was the color of cold metal, the sun just a smudge behind ash. I heard them before I saw them. The synchronized tread of soldiers whose boots had never known mud, the click of rebreathers. They moved through the ruins like a machine given shape, weapons raised but steady. The air around them smelled of antiseptic and ozone, the smell of order reclaiming chaos. We stood when they told us to stand. 12 of us, the last dregs of the penal battalion hollowed out by exhaustion and smoke. No one resisted. We were too empty for that. Their commander's armor was unscarred, lenses black, voice flat through a vox mask. Identify. I lifted my arm, showing the brand burned into my shoulder. Unit 72C, I rasped. He nodded once, keyed something on his slate. The others did the same for each survivor, every gesture identical. It wasn't recognition, it was record-keeping, inventory before disposal. When the last name and the last number was read, the commander lowered his slate. By decree of Segmentum Command, Penal Detachment 72 is concluded. Your sentence is fulfilled, no one cheered. The words hung in the cold air, meaningless. Fulfilled could only mean one thing. I felt the weight of the collar again, the old heat under the skin, the hum beginning to rise. One of the others muttered a prayer. Another began to laugh, thin and broken. I only breathed. Slowly. Gratefully. There was mercy in the stillness, and I wanted it to last. For one heartbeat, I thought that perhaps this was what redemption truly was. Not glory, not forgiveness. Just silence. Then the rune at my throat flared white. It wasn't pain. It was light. The world dissolved into it, pure and absolute, swallowing smoke, ruin, and thought alike. Inside that brilliance there was sound, a hum that grew into a choir. A billion voices, all whispering the same word, endure. Through them I felt something vast, a presence behind the light. The Emperor. But not the Emperor of shrines and hymns, not the golden corpse painted in the catechisms. This thing was endless thought and hunger, a sun made of the souls that had burned for him. Every prayer, every death, every obedient act, all of it fed into his being, keeping his light alive. He was not watching, he was feeding, and as the collar's heat rose, I felt myself pulled into him, not ascending, dissolving. My memories flaked away like rust. The commissar's voice, the woman's smile, the mud, the cold, Mayder, all stripped and added to the machinery of his will. I wanted to scream, but the sound joined the hymn. I wanted to deny him, but denial became another verse. Then, beneath it all, a whisper surfaced, quiet and exact. Unit 72C. Acknowledged. A line entered in the ledger of eternity. That was all any of us ever were. Entries in his endless account of suffering. As the last of me unraveled, I saw the truth of his creed. Not believe, not serve, only endure. And then even that thought went out. The light stayed, cold, complete. Thus ends the confession of Unit 72C.